guys, welcome to Tall Tales with Taco. Mitch Taco Bell here with you. Listen, with all the stuff going over with Russia and the Ukraine, the topic of tanks has come up numerous times, and it actually fascinates the living crap out of me. I get sucked into the YouTube black hole of watching these dudes with drones and hand grenades, and all of a sudden, like popcorn, these Russian tanks just exploding. And it's like I talk to aviators, I've talked to writers, I've talked to actors, I've talked to all these people, but this is the one MOS I don't think that I've ever touched on. So through high-low searching, I found Captain Jeff Hatten, who is a former captain in the United States Marine Corps, and he's going to come on board to talk to us about his experience with the mighty M-1 Abrams. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, it is the biggest, baddest piece of machinery out there. But the questions we're going to ask: can it hold up in the war conditions that they're experiencing over in the Ukraine right now? And this will just be a fun topic. So without further ado, Jeff, how are you, sir?
I'm awesome. Thanks so much for having me on. This is I feel giddy like a school kid. I can't wait to get into talking about the Abrams.
Well, wait till you come over and you drink a beer with me on Monday, and we're sitting around the man cave looking at a 30 millimeter. Now, I know it's not what you had, but it's the closest thing I could get that the HOA would allow because we have asphalt. I think a real tank would tear the living crap out of my asphalt.
No question about it.
Yeah. So go back. You joined the Marines in '95, OCS, the basic school, and you end up getting one of what? One of 3 tank slots.
Yeah, there were actually 5 for our TBS company. This won't mean anything to the non-Marine officers out there, but to the Marine officers, they'll understand that the thirds, the classes force ranked 1 through, and the top third gets a certain number of slots, middle third and bottom third. And so I was the guy that was at the top of the bottom third. I was
You weren't the anchor man, but
no, I was at the bottom of the bottom third, but I was the top of the bottom third. And what that meant was, as the MOS selections were being handed out, being at the top, you kind of got your pick of the litter of what was left at that point. And the Marine Corps spreads the MOSs across all the different thirds of the infantry company. I got the one last remaining tank spot. It was my number 1 choice. It was what I wanted to do since even before I got in the Marine Corps. But a lot of people don't realize officers don't get to pick. Unless you guys are on a flight contract. When you come into the Marine Corps as a ground officer, it's the needs of the Marine Corps, it's your class ranking, and a lot of voodoo goes into how you get picked. And so I was very fortunate to land in tanks.
Did you have any SPCs who were tankers?
We had one from a sister company who was, and he kind of gave us the down low on the career night, as they called it, where you walked around and talked to different officers from different MOSs. And at that point at TBS, I was tired of walking, I was tired of being cold.
Yeah.
I was tired of carrying everything in the world on my back. And I just said, here's the deal. This thing is pretty much bulletproof. You ride everywhere. It has a heater. And so that kind of helped me make the decision as well.
Well, now, when you were there, we were kind of talking off air about this. I remember my experience with the tank was an M60 tank that was attached to the basic school. And they were driving this son of a gun down a dirt path. And we all laid on the ground right next, inches away. And you had to lay there as this tank rumbled by. And I just remember thinking, golly, man, that thing, if you just screwed up, you're smushed. That was impressive. It was so big.
Yeah,
and heavy.
And transitioning to the Abrams, you now have a jet engine in that thing, so it's no longer a diesel clatter engine. It sounds every bit like a jet winding up and moving along, and so the exhaust blowing out of that, if you were too close to it, the exhaust alone. Of course, on winter ops, the infantry love to gather up behind the tank and feel that nice warm air.
Now, there's so many questions I want to ask. All right, so you get into tanks. Now, tell us about the Abrams. Kind of like C-130 guys, we go to the Air Force and initially train with them on a C-130. You went to Fort Knox, right?
Correct. So because the tank battalions, there were only 4, 2 active and 2 reserve at that time, were such a small part of the overall Marine Corps, the basic training for it was outsourced to the Army, who obviously had many battalions of tanks. And so we joint trained with Army second lieutenants in the summer at their armor officer basic class and learned the Abrams. So we were on the M-1 A1. The Marine Corps had the A1. At the time, the Army was just getting into the A2. But the tank system, the variants of the Abrams are so similar. There really isn't any difference in the training at that time in the systems and how to operate them.
So once you get checked out in one, you're probably good for all of them with
Not
minor variations.
and they started integrating a lot of the GPS technology that where the tanks were communicating with each other and sharing locations and things of that nature. All of that was still really fresh at my time. So it's been, that was the summer of 1996 that I was at Armor Officer School.
Well, when you got into your unit, did you have any guys that were part of the first Gulf War? Any officers in there that, for professional standards, to give you a little information on what it was like in combat?
Yeah, absolutely. There were actually quite a few guys, both senior NCOs and officers, who were Gulf War veterans. In fact, it was interesting. In my at Charlie Company, I was the only officer in the company who hadn't been in Desert Storm. Several had been as an enlisted and gone to the officer route. And my company commander was a lieutenant, a platoon commander in Desert Storm. So we had quite a bit of at least some real world application, but all of those guys had served on the M60. So none of them were Abrams guys.
It's funny. We had a guy, Tim Hart, who was in our group, and he was in the first Gulf War, and he had transitioned from 60s to the M1 over there. Or did they use M1s in the first Gulf War?
So
we had M1s.
Marine Corps did get issued M1s and kind of OJT'd it right there on the spot in Kuwait. There were a number of companies that's the route that they took. I believe Second Tanks was one of the units that was given Abrams. They were Army Abrams, but it was kind of the crash course. And a tank is kind of a tank in a lot of respects in terms of how you load it. The sighting system, the aiming system on the Abrams is so much superior to that of the M60. Those guys probably thought they were in heaven. It's really lays and blaze. It's pretty simple to fire the thing.
So how fast can you actually go and shoot on the move with the gyro stabilize deal?
Well, the engine's governed, but we got a hold of one time that the governor must have been a little loose on. And, I remember being at 60 miles an hour in the tank, and
what's that like? Are you just getting the crap beat out of you?
Oh, not at all. No, it's the suspension on the Abrams when you're moving across terrain feels like you're in a boat. It floats. So that track system it's a supported track. So a little bit of nuance here. If you look at Soviet tanks, that would have what we call a Christie suspension, where you see the top of the track is rolling across rollers that are
like that.
So we're a supported track with the Abrams. You can't see it behind the fender skirts there, but there are smaller wheels above the larger wheels, and again, they're protected there so that you can't see it in those photos. But that form of suspension is much smoother. It's phenomenally smooth. It really equates much more to feeling like you're riding in a boat than when you're riding over rough ground. So there's not a lot of jarring and bouncing. It's more of just a gentle rock and roll over terrain.
That is amazing. I would think, as you're going over stuff, you're just getting the crap beat out of you.
Not
inside
at all.
of it,
It's quite the opposite, which is a little counterintuitive. The first time you go rolling around in one, and again, the mass of the thing is so great. Anything small you roll over, it just doesn't even register.
Now, how much does the average M1 weigh?
It quotes around 60 tons. It depends a little bit on the loadout that it's carrying, but that's pretty close to accurate. I've heard between 56 and 62. So she's pretty heavy. It's a C-17 can only carry one.
A what? A C-17?
Can only carry one.
So I bet you were vastly impressed with a team when they pop out with the parachutes, and then the parachutes get shot out, and they use the gun to slow their descent into the lake, right? Which is, of course,
that wouldn't be the ideal way to go for sure. we did. There's a video out there somewhere of some Marines in Norway, and they're drifting on snow. They're running a track in a training exercise, and they're drifting. And I did that once as well, and it wasn't on snow, and it wasn't on purpose. It's quite a feeling to power slide the Abrams going 30, 40 miles an hour.
Yeah, oh, I bet. And we talk about being able to shoot on the move. Can the Russians do that? Are their tanks capable of doing that?
So the whole shoot on the move technology is the way it was explained to me. It's interesting. It actually was developed, I think, by NASA as a way to track. Imagine an Apollo capsule bobbing in the ocean.
Mhm.
Imagine a Navy ship that's trying to track that, and the ship's bobbing and the capsule's bobbing. And so, in order to shoot a beam to that capsule, and this is 1960s technology, right,
Mhm.
and lock onto it, that this technology had to be invented to stabilize the tracking across the ocean like that. So that same principle is what's applied to a moving Abrams locking on to either a stationary or moving target. Do the Russians have it? Most modern battle tanks have some iteration of that same technology to be able to fire and move.
Right.
Some are better than others. Yeah,
Yeah, that's because I mean to have to stop and then acquire your target, that's just setting yourself up.
absolutely. Speed is life in a tank.
Now, what's the comfort level inside the tank? The driver is secluded. He's by himself in like a little capsule, right? In
He's
the
the most
front.
comfortable guy in the tank, without
So is
question.
it like a couch laying down in there?
He's in a reclined position. His feet are up at about the position of his chest. He's leaning back and he's holding a T handle that he's
Uh-huh.
driving with, and the throttle is also on the T handle. And that guy's pretty comfortable and very well protected there. The rest of us in the turret, maybe not so much. There's a lot of stuff inside the turret that's not soft. It's not ergonomic to crew comfort isn't necessarily what was in mind when they
Right.
built the thing. So you find your little ways to bend your head a certain way and your shoulder another way to, to take a nap when you need to and that sort of thing. But the driver, many times, we had to get out of the tank, get a wrench and bang on the hatch to wake the guy up. He's in a recliner down there. And so you're screaming on the intercom, move out, move out, move out. And he's asleep. And so
You can't bang on the front
no,
where
there's
the
really no. There's the turret when it's turned at a certain position. There's an opening in the turret column, so that he could climb out. So when you store the tank, you actually reverse the turret, put the gun barrel over the rear deck, and then opening is there for him to climb out through the turret. But unless you spin it around and grab the guy and shake him, he's not a way to get his attention.
Oh my god, that is so funny. And now, did you guys ever spend the night in the tank? Did you sleep inside?
Many times, but we prefer to sleep on top of it. And again, my experience is entirely peacetime. But there were a couple of spots on top of the tank that were more comfortable than others with your old foam roll mat that you roll out there. And most of the time, you just sleep on top.
And where'd you guys keep all your gear and kit? Was that all hanging on the side of the tank?
Yeah, a couple of sponson boxes on the side. They're mostly full of tools, but for the most part, there's a bustle rack in the back where we would keep packs and things of that nature, or strap them to the outside of it. Really, not a lot of room to store much inside the turret, so
Yeah, I was gonna
everything's pretty much
say.
strapped to the outside.
See if I have a picture of the back. Okay, so here's a side view, and it looks like, yeah, a bunch of packs and stuff that's back behind you.
Yeah, that tarp that you see on the back of the turret there is covering up whatever gear that they have, and that tarp looks like part of either um, a camouflage cover system or something like that. And that spot was just perfectly wide enough to put it. There it is. You can see the
Yeah.
railed basket on the back of the turret there. It was just wide enough to put a igloo ice chest in there.
Ah, okay.
That came in handy as well.
I bet. And all your gear sits out there. Um, Wintertime, the heat off the engine deck, you guys could put some stuff and heat it up and then lay there, right?
Yeah, we've you can put your canteen cup on the exhaust and boil your coffee water, and there's all kinds of neat tricks that the Lance Corporals, you give them a little bit of wire and some aluminum foil, and they're watching satellite TV.
My God, man, that is so cool. Now, what size round does that fire?
That's 120 millimeter, and if you have a picture of the round, there's something that is pretty
Yeah.
interesting about the round itself. There you go. So the gray part that you're seeing there is actually combustible cardboard. And so when the round is loaded, the black at the front is a sleeve of petals. There's 3 petals. That's where the name sabot comes from. It's a French word. The penetrator rod obviously is inside, encased inside there. When the round fires, all that kicks out of the breech is the metal piece that you see at the bottom. That little, it's called an aft cap, and that little piece is all that comes out. The rest of it is part of the propulsion, part of the explosion that launches the dart downrange.
Now, when they're talking about depleted uranium, these things have depleted uranium in there to be able to penetrate armor, or?
Right. So that's what's at the core of that penetrator rod. If I had one handy, I could show it to you. But it looks like a giant dart. It's a kinetic energy weapon. There's no explosive innate to the sabot round. There are other explosive rounds, high explosive rounds. But this is a tank killer, and it kills by moving at such a high velocity and being made of such a dense, depleted uranium at its core material that as it impacts steel, it's literally liquefying that steel and driving a hole through it, and typically in one side and out the other. And you're creating a pressure differential inside the armored vehicle that you just hit that's so great that it forces a vacuum, and there's stories of people being sucked out softball size holes on the other side.
Okay, so say it's a T-72. Well, they're having obviously a lot of issues. The T-80s, T-72s that they're using with the ammo being stored underneath the crew, right?
Right.
And our ammo stored in the back of the turret?
Yeah, they actually put crew survivability as a high priority when the Abrams was designed. So all of the ammo sits in the back half. If you go back to that picture of an Abrams, maybe the side view, about the back half of the turret. So you see the commander standing in the cupola there. At the back half of the turret is where the rounds are stored in a honeycomb type of storage. And there's a pneumatic door that the loader presses a latch with his knee, and that door slides open. He pulls a round out, releases the latch, the door closes, and he loads the round. If the turret is hit, or the ammo compartment is hit in such a way that detonates all that ammunition, there's blast doors on the top of the turret that fly off, and the crew inside the turret is completely protected from the explosion itself. Now, if I was hanging out the top of it, I might be in trouble, but
even inside, you'd be able to survive the concussion of all that?
Absolutely. It's all by design. Those rounds cook off. This is lessons going back to World War II with the Sherman tank. And, the detonation of your own innate ammo is what kills a lot of crews.
Right.
The Soviets don't have this design. Most of the other main battle tanks have some variation, but not really the same thing. But the Abrams is a highly survivable tank for that main reason. God,
that is just nuts. And how much machine gun ammo would you guys carry? Would that also be stored on the back, or where do you keep your ammo?
A lot of the machine gun ammo, so there's a hopper for the coax, and my recollection is the hopper holds 20,000 rounds when it's fully stacked. So the on top you've got the 50 cal, the commander's 50, and then the loader's 240. Both of those typically are just slave to an individual box of 100 rounds or so. And then extra boxes are stored wherever you can store them.
Now, are those machine guns remote control? Like you can fire them from inside, buttoned up?
They had a very primitive system in the A1 that allowed you, as the commander, you had a separate sight, and when the 50 was slaved and zeroed to that sight, then you had a remote firing handle that you could fire from inside. The newer systems are even more sophisticated. I'm not as educated on how they work, but it is designed to be fired internally. The loader, a little bit different story. That 240 that you see behind that soldier there, it's still pretty much a manual system where he's got to be exposed. They've added, various types of armor setups, as you see there, to protect him. But that particular weapon system is actually considered as much an anti-aircraft deterrent as it is anti-personnel. It's not a very accurate system whatsoever. It's a free swinging 240. So it's kind of just spray and suppressive fire.
And how do you guys operate normally? I mean, we're kind of talking about faults with the Russians, but how do you integrate infantry with the average tank operation? When you guys are out practicing and you get the young troops with you, how do you guys integrate all that stuff?
It's a great question, and I'm sure we're going to dig more into some of the tactical side of it. But the challenge that most armies face is combined arms exercises are very complex. They're very expensive, but they're essential because you don't fight as an independent tank platoon. You don't fight as an independent tank company. You're always integrated with artillery, with infantry, with engineers, with air support in that kind of combined arms way. So that's how we trained. There would be times as tankers, we would be frustrated with the scenario because the battalion may encounter an armored column, and we would want to say, okay, move out of the way. We'll go take care of them. That's 5 minutes and we're done. But you don't train that way because you're never going to really face armor on armor with no infantry and no missiles and no, they may not have any air power. If you think about Iraq, we weren't really worried about Hind helicopters. We weren't really worried about MiG-29s, but we did have to think about RPGs, and we did have to think about other Sagger missile systems and so forth. So there's no tank pure muscle on muscle duking it out heavyweight fight that's going to happen. Even as far back as the Gulf War, that really wasn't the case.
Well, I thought in the Gulf War they did have tank on tank.
There were, but we also had Bradleys in there shooting TOW missiles. We also had aircraft in there flying over top. The Iraqis didn't. The Iraqis had this concept of, we're going to line our tanks up, we're going to dig them in, we're going to use them like basically pillboxes without infantry support. They did have some artillery support. Without an infantry support in a combined arms way, they were toast. Those, to your point, those battles, were pretty short battles.
Now, RPG, can an RPG penetrate the armor on a M1?
Not likely. There's not
just
really
ding off, but you could blow off a wheel or something or disable it.
Sure. There's always some small percent, lucky BB kind of shot that someone might make that would hit a track block just the right way and throw the track or damage a road wheel in such a way. But in terms of penetrating the hull, not likely.
Right. And the only escape out of the tank is through the top, through the hatches.
Correct. Yeah.
Not like Fury where he climbs down some little escape hatch.
No escape out the bottom. Yeah. So a really, really cool story about that. And I can't, this is a little bit of hearsay, but when I was at Fort Knox, they told a story of a tank an Abrams that went through some deep water at night in a training exercise. And for whatever reason, the tank stalled out or the engine died in the water. And it's flooding, and it floods all the way up to the top of the skirts. The turret crew bails out, but they can't get the driver out. And so one of the students, in a moment of genius, pulled the 240 barrel off and slid it into the little opening. Couldn't get the driver's hatch all the way open because of the position of the turret. And the driver snorkeled out of that 240 barrel for some length of time until they could bring a retriever and pull that thing out of the mud and get the guy out.
Oh my God.
You can't be claustrophobic.
That's right. Okay. So the turret, you have to turn it to be able to pop the hatch.
Correct.
For the driver.
And it was turned in such a way that they couldn't pop his hatch all the way, enough for him to get out.
Yeah. Wow.
The guy got a free transfer to any other MOS that he wanted, as the story goes.
Pretty smart guy, though. I bet he owed his buddy a lot of beer.
His buddy got a medal. I'm pretty sure they gave the guy a pretty high medal for thinking of the machine gun barrel.
Yeah, that's smart as hell, actually. What kind of stuff did you guys practice in terms of I know what I wanted to ask. The reactive armor that I see on the Soviet tanks. We don't have any of that stuff that I looked, at all the pictures. Here's second tanks right here out there playing in the mud. We don't have the reactive armor that the Soviet tanks have. Is that a detriment, or is that actually something that helps you out?
I think that the logic would be that we don't need it. It's all top secret stuff, but whatever the magic sauce is that's in those skirts and in that armor. So the armor itself has depleted uranium in it. And those things are proprietary. So quick side note, when you hear about the U.S. sending Abrams tanks to Saudi Arabia or other countries, there's an export model that doesn't have the same armor complement that our tanks have. But the Abrams tank, and I'm sure the engineers have tested this every which way, is impenetrable to any sort of missile system in terms of a direct hit on those most likely to be hit surfaces. So there's a lot of asterisks and caveats to that. Top-down weapons, that's a different story. The top armor isn't as thick as obviously the front slope. But the design of the tank and the design of the armor itself is so effective that there really isn't anything out there that's going to penetrate that. Reactive armor is largely designed to fight against high explosive weaponry, where it's going to take that propulsion that's coming in from that RPG or that high explosive type round and redirect the blast of that back the direction it came to kind of blunt a high explosive round. So, if your tank doesn't quite have the armor it needs to stand up against a strong missile system like the TOW or the Javelin or the Hellfire, you think in terms of those are all explosive rounds compared to a kinetic round like we looked at a picture of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. How would the Javelin fare against the M1? Or how would the M1, I should say, fare against the Javelin type?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we really haven't faced a near peer with the Javelin has a top-down attack profile, and that's what makes it so effective. So you think about what these things weigh, and you're trying to save weight somewhere. You're trying to put the armor where you're most likely to get hit. Well, when they were designed, you weren't most likely to get hit directly from above. These were going to be 90-degree shots or head-on shots, and so that's where you stacked your armor. So the top armor on most tanks, including the Abrams, is not really designed to stop something like a Javelin missile. But we haven't faced that. That type of sophisticated anti-tank guided missile is not something that the Taliban really had or that we faced in Iraq. So all of these modern battle tanks, we're seeing the effects on Soviet tanks now, T-80s, T-72s. But if we get Leopard tanks from Germany and we get Abrams tanks into the fight in Ukraine, we're going to find out, because the Soviets do have some of this same type of technology in their weapon systems.
But what about the little drones dropping the hand grenades? I mean, you can't battle against that. I mean, the dude.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I've seen the videos as well, and the payloads of those things. I'm not sure. I mean, a guy could swish a shot and drop one in an open hatch. Maybe I've seen some pretty precise drops if those videos are true. You certainly, anybody standing up outside the tank, that thing, it's going to take out your tank commander, your loader. So riding around the battlefield, and this is where it's a double-edged sword. So we'll button up the hatches. Now
you can't see.
Now you can't see anything, or you can see very limited compared to a commander who's up and has that field of view. Yeah. So there's trade-offs there, and this comes back to the importance of having infantry support. So if I'm buttoned up, which is going to protect me not just from drones, but you just think about regular field artillery shrapnel flying around the battlefield. So I need to button up to be protected from those things, but at the same time, now my visibility is limited. So I'm really relying on radio communication or other types of communication with ground units around me who are going to direct me where I need to be swinging that turret and what type of posture I need to take.
Yeah, we probably got Blue Force trackers inside now to be able to distinguish, oh, that's a Bradley over there, or, good guys, bad guys.
That's the stuff I never got to play with, but that stuff. So that's what the new models are equipped with. We can talk to Bradleys. We can kind of have that IFF beacon, so to speak, to help us know what to shoot at. But the problem with that, again, is that's a training intensive tool. That's not something, you could drop someone in, and I think in a pretty relatively short amount of time, teach them how to open the ammo rack and put a round in, how to arm the gun, how to press the laser, how to read the range and squeeze the trigger. Like, I think that's a pretty easy thing to do. Even driving the tank, it's not a week or two behind the wheel and you've got it. But when you're talking about move and communicate, integrating fires, calling for fire from your artillery support, communicating with a drone that's overhead, these are much more complex tactical demands, and you're not going to learn that and be able to use it while someone's shooting at you in just a week or two of training.
Yeah, I saw somewhere. Was it a 24-week program? Did you read that too? That they're sending the Ukrainians over for like a 24-week program on the Abrams. Now the ones that we're sending them makes me wonder if they're old Marine Corps deactivated M1s.
Yeah, it made me wonder too. I think probably not, because they probably are going to get export models, would be my guess. We
Yeah.
really don't want the Chinese or the Russians getting a hold of one of these things and at any cost and ripping apart that armor and figuring out, the secret sauce, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I never even knew that. That's amazing. Um, what is the best terrain to fight and utilize a tank? I mean, I remember in Iraq they rolled through Fallujah and they were using them quite effectively against the insurgents. But is that kind of as a tanker, you probably feel better out in the open, don't you? Not
For sure. Yeah.
not in an urban environment.
No, tanks don't really like cities as a general rule. We made it work in Iraq because of our combined arms philosophy and how the infantry is clearing houses down the block, the tanks being brought up to, put a main gun round in a specific window. So they're really good at limiting collateral damage in that way.
Mhm.
Because there's a guy in a window with an RPG or an RPK. He's not bothering that tank, but the tank's going to take him out.
Mhm.
He can stop a whole infantry platoon in their tracks and hold them down. So a tank can be very effective in an urban environment, but in general, again, you're weak from the top. You're vulnerable to mines. You're vulnerable to IEDs. It may be a mobility kill. So if a tank loses a track, that can be a multi-hour operation to repair the track when you break it, and you
Actually,
can't. Yeah,
got a picture of you.
there's 30 minutes before the end of the exercise. We break the track, and we spent the rest of the afternoon out there. That's at Fort Knox. And so the gentleman on the right there, one of my classmates, I believe, was actually in Fallujah as a tank commander. And then the guy in the middle was a Lebanese exchange officer, which we kind of had a side eye to why we were letting the Lebanese train with us, but they were there.
Interesting. Are you in contact with the guy on the right?
I haven't talked to him in a number of years. Some of the guys in my class I still keep up with, but I haven't talked to Greg in a long, long time.
You need to we need to get him on the podcast. I'd like to talk to him about Fallujah. But looking at that, you've got wires. How do you restring that thing?
Yeah, so there's you think about like I don't know the right way to like a clamp, if you will.
Uh-huh.
So there's a section of track that's broken. So there's many track blocks, and way back when I could tell you how many. If you look at the right side that's intact, you can see the individual blocks. Each
Mhm.
block has two pads. Those blocks are connected with an end connector. So it's a metal, looks like a
Yeah.
figure eight that connects one to the next. So a lot of times the end connector might break or something in the track itself might break. So you roll it out, you back the tank up and roll it out. You take the block that's busted and you remove it. And a lot of times you'll be carrying 4 or 5 extra track blocks on the tank with you, strapped to the tank somewhere, and extra end connectors. And then you replace them. And then you roll the tank back forward. And there's a series of what I would call like jacks or clamps where we're going to wrench that thing around and line it up with the piece that it's mated to, and then hammer on those end connectors. This was fairly dry ground in a
Yeah.
nice day, other
Yeah.
than being a little hot and muggy. But we've done this in the cold, in the mud. We've certainly never had to do it under fire, thankfully. But it's quite an operation.
Does that happen often? I mean, the tracks break like that?
Yeah, it's a good point to the Ukrainians getting tanks. This does happen. I don't know if often, you know, I would say once an exercise, somebody was breaking a track. I mean, it's
Wow.
often enough that you'll do it enough to be proficient at it. You do it enough times, you get better at it. But
Yeah.
there's other things that break. There's torsion bars that break. There's engines that won't start. We had a bad starter on my tank at 29 Palms one time. This is a crazy story. And so, not unlike something you do with your car, in order to start the tank, we'd have to pull the engine plate off and bang with a hammer on the starter to get it to kick over. Well, our mechanic figured out which wire was bad on the starter. And
Uh-huh.
downrange, there was an M60 target tank that had just been shot to smithereens, right? But it still had its engine. And we got in a Humvee at 2 a.m., went downrange on a cold range, climbed inside this M60, the Swiss cheese from all the shots that had been put on it, went into the engine compartment, found that wire, pulled it off. People are going to say that's bullshit, but that's a true story.
No
Came
way.
back, wired it into my tank, and she ran like a top the rest of the way.
Improvise, adapt, overcome. I
We
love
were
it.
tired of having to pull the plate off and hit the thing with a hammer every time.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, we found
Yeah.
it off.
And those plates and armor weighs a ton, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's expensive, and the plate had a nickname. It was called the bitch plate, and the reason it was called the bitch plate is it was a bitch to put it back on if you ever had to pull it off.
Is it on the front or the back?
That's over the engine in the back. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't have a picture of that. Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about. When you come over here, I've got 2 heavy grills that we gotta put back over on the Fox. So you and your son can help me do that.
There you go.
Um, what other kind of stuff, your impressions of what's going on right now with the war and what
Yeah.
you've seen? I know as a pilot, when I saw that one video of like 50 tanks sitting on a road, all I could think of was my A-10 buddies right now are having helmet meltdown, just wishing they were in an A-10 coming down on a guy on that whole line. What sort of mistakes have you seen, your observations of how they've used maneuver and fire, I should say,
Yeah,
or tactics?
this is the really fun question, and I'm looking at this as a veteran and as someone with kind of a knowledge of how these things work and how they're supposed to work in a combined arms way, but also just as an independent observer, like we all are, and just seeing this happen. So, a couple things. You asked me a moment ago about ideal terrain. When you see tanks on a road like that, it's showing you that the fields are boggy, right? And so,
Mhm,
so much of the war in Ukraine is being directed by the seasons and the weather. You take your tank out into the mud, it's going to get stuck. And so,
mhm,
if you're limited to certain travel corridors, now you're limited to certain bridges, you're limited to certain places that you really can't break out and maneuver. You can kind of just go in single file. Well, you're a pretty target rich environment in that respect. You're really juicy to an artillery battery that wants to light you up. You're juicy to aircraft. You're juicy to a bunch of guys in tree lines that can flank you all day long
right.
with surface to air. I'm sorry, with guided missiles. So ideal terrain is dry, open, rolling. I mean, we'd love that kind of stuff. And with some, you know, a little bit of nuance, the desert's a good place for a tank. You've got different challenges with dust getting in the engine packs and things of that nature, but it's a wide open space. And
Mhm.
because I can reach out and hit you from miles away, I like that. I like that space. When you
Yeah, I can see
confine
that.
me to a city or a road system or a town because I can't get out and maneuver, now I'm really vulnerable. And then the question that everybody's asking, and this is the personal emotional side, when the Marine Corps got rid of tanks,
Mhm.
commandant said, we're going a different direction. We're going the direction of missiles. We're going in the direction of light. We're going in the direction of things that we can move quickly and the tank's just not any of those things. It's heavy. It's got a long maintenance tail. It's maintenance intensive, and it's within the scope of the entire Marine Corps. We were 2 active battalions, so you're
Yeah.
talking about just over 100 total tanks in the entire Marine Corps on active duty. Compared to what the Army has, it's just a drop in the bucket. So the question is the tank going the way of the battleship? Right? Is this the moment in modern warfare where we're seeing what used to be, the king of the battlefield? Sorry, artillery, but it's really the tank that's the king of the battlefield, being knocked off its throne and being displaced by drones or missiles or those kinds of things. And it's an interesting question. What we're mostly seeing the Russians do wrong, and I don't know that the Ukrainians are doing any better, is they're operating tanks without infantry support. They're trying to maneuver, they're driving through cities and towns, they're going down roads, and in all these videos, unless there's parts that we're just not really seeing, which is possible, there's no infantry spotting and laying down suppressive fire on missile teams. There's no infantry clearing the block ahead of where the tank is going or the 3 blocks ahead of where the tank is going. So you really need those boots on the ground, those eyes on the ground to be your eyes for you as you're maneuvering a tank unit, battalion, platoon, whatever the case may be. Certainly, you're seeing individual tanks picked off left and right that are, I mean, that's just a big, juicy target. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
I mean, some of those guys are doing like 60 miles an hour down, a column of 3, and they're just sitting there cruising along. All of a sudden, you see. I mean, it's like they're drunk, and next thing you know, they're getting picked off, hit by a javelin. Next one blows up, and artillery hits the other guy, and it starts fizzling like a Roman candle.
yeah, it's, I, those guys, those crews, I can't imagine. I mean, we think about the 8th Air Force and in World War II and the survivability of the B-17 crews. It's
Yeah.
got to be somewhere on that scale. If you're an armored crewman in this conflict, your survivability's got to be pretty low. Everything is stacked against those guys. But
Oh,
tanks don't hold ground.
They what?
Tanks don't hold ground. They can take ground, but infantry holds ground. And so
Right.
if we rush a dozen tanks into a little village, those tanks can't hold that village. It takes
Yeah.
the troops to come in and hold that village.
Yeah. Golly. Tell you, I feel bad for them because you see it when they vaporize or when the turret blows up, and then you see the Ukrainians filming inside. Everything inside there was atomized or vaporized.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
no body parts left,
brutal.
maybe a little bone, but feel bad for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, so maybe General Berger had something in mind if we're looking to lighten our load to get over into the islands where we may be fighting our next adversaries in the Pacific. Tanks may not be the best. Although, I mean, even in World War II, though, we used tanks with flamethrowers. I mean, Marines, we had Shermans with flamethrowers on them going in there and firing up the Japs. So,
The same concept, though. You had a pile of infantry. They run into a
protecting
bunker,
them.
call for the tank. The tank rolls forward, pretty much impervious to anything that the Japanese foot soldiers would have had. And then they light them up with the flame. And so
Mhm.
that's a really good use of the firepower of the tank in combination with the infantry. And so, are we going to be in a protracted slugfest with, tanks in the South Pacific? Probably not. Are we going to face drones? Are we going to face, light maneuverable units? Probably so.
Yeah.
And I hate it, but I can be candid and say in my time when we sent a tank detachment on a MEU, it was 4 tanks, and just the logistical support for 4 tanks to go out on a MEU for 6 months, the amount of effort it took to keep those 4 tanks up and running for 6 months at a time was astronomical. And so when I look at, I'll throw in just a little opinion here. When I hear the headline, "We're sending Abrams to Ukraine," there's a huge part of me that says it's a total waste.
Mhm.
Because even if you can effectively train those crews, can you effectively support logistically the track blocks and all the ongoing maintenance that has to happen? Those engine packs get clogged with dirt. You got to pull that pack and blow it out. This is a lot of maintenance that has to be done. For all of their lack of crew survivability and sophistication, Soviet tanks are a lot simpler. If you
To
think
work on,
about,
sure.
an older car that doesn't have all the chips that your car has and doesn't have that technology,
Mhm.
somewhat of a comparable comparison. And so putting 31 Abrams into the mix, I'm not sure really how that tilts the scale in Ukraine's favor. We'll see.
Yeah, they'll send them out, let them go for about a week. They'll break down, they'll tow it back, and it'll sit in a marshalling yard somewhere, I'm sure,
That's likely what's going to happen.
as a training aid. Um, tank movies have always fascinated me over the years, as starting with Patton. You know, when you watch Patton and all the old movies where they used M48s as, American tanks with swastikas on them or the, German cross. What is your favorite tank movies or scenes?
I was sharing with you offline that I had a good friend who was actually, he lived the movie Fury. He was actually in the Battle of the Bulge and in the early days of crossing into Germany in a Sherman tank. And he didn't really like the movie, but he didn't like much that came out of Hollywood. But
Yeah,
I actually found so many of the nuances of the life inside the tank and the way that those guys operated to be, resonated with me. And I really, really liked that movie and how it portrayed the reality of, what life was like going up against a Tiger tank. What was life like going up against, embedded infantry. And it took a lot of courage for those guys to go into battle in the Sherman. And there's a lot of, historians debate it back and forth. The idea, I think, was to build a tank that was fast and
mhm,
build a lot of them. And the Germans built tanks that were slower and heavier and not as many of them. And so in the end, I think, what is the saying? The Russians had quantity has a quality all its own.
yeah,
So the numerical superiority and the grinding down, it worked, but we paid a lot of blood in Sherman tank crews. But I really did
yeah,
enjoy that movie.
Yeah, I always loved not Kiefer Sutherland, Donald Sutherland.
Ah,
Uh, hey man, all the negative vibes, man. What was that movie?
oh
Uh,
yeah, the Kelly's Heroes. I can't
Kelly's
believe
Heroes. Yes.
that's what that prior to Fury, that's all the one-liners that those things were thrown around all the time, you know. Yeah,
Like Top.
as an officer, you would say, "Hey, I don't fix them. I just ride them."
Hey man, I don't fix them, dude. I just ride them, man. Put on
Yeah,
the
for
radio.
sure.
It's kind of like Apocalypse Now, and they've got the speakers playing,
For
working on the
sure.
railroad.
For sure.
I
Yeah,
love that movie.
we would wire of course, it was a Walkman in those days, but you could figure out how you cut the earbuds off of a Walkman, plug it
Right,
in the headphone jack, and then you could wire it into the intercom system of the tank, and we listened to cassette tapes of all things, right, back in those
right.
days. But mostly what was rolling in our tank was either Boston, a lot of Boston, everybody liked that, it was kinda good music, or Metallica. Yeah, that's pretty much what's going on inside the tank.
Yeah, we figured out the same thing in the C-130. Taking one of the headset jacks, and then a guy soldered all the wiring to it so that you could plug in like anything. You could plug anything, play it all,
Yeah.
and have a little music for the ride of
It's
the
little
vocals.
creature comforts like that that make the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing tank. I told you I flew with a guy. He told me, he goes, yeah, I've got like, I don't know, make this up, 1,500 hours in an M1. And I go, how do you count hours in a tank? I mean, you have like a logbook? And he goes, yeah, I actually had a logbook. I kept all the tank, the serial number of the tank, um, the hours on the hobs that they had. And he was the guy that they built them. He got hired. He was 18 years old, and he's a welder. He'd gotten his certification when he was 16, and he was a master welder. So he's 18 years old. He's going for a job interview there in Detroit, and he comes downstairs. And he's wearing ratty ass jeans and t-shirt, and his mom goes, "No, no, no! Get back up. Put on your Sunday outfit." And he's like, "Mom, everybody's going to be dressed like this." And she goes, "Not my son." So he goes down there and he applies, and they look at his resume and they look at him. He's dressed in a suit, and they said, "We're going to make you the weld inspector."
Uh,
Really? And so he's the weld inspector. So his job was to take the tank and drive it over this course that they had out there, big dirt course that had all the hills and little bumps and stuff like that. And then the final thing was drive it into a big pond of water up to where the driver's thing hatch was. Then he would climb out and he would go to the back and open up, and he would inspect the welds in the engine bay to make sure no water got up in there. And if he saw where water was seeping through, he marked it and then took it back, and they had to fix it. So he got paid big time to do that. But his whole sole job was weld inspector, welding.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and so all the money he made as a young guy, he turned around and used that to get flying lessons and became a pilot. Now he's a commercial airline pilot.
All
But I
because
thought that was funny.
mom made him put a suit on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All
Had his
because
mind
his
in the
mom
right
told him to get
frame.
dressed up for the job, right? Dress for your job, damn it.
Yeah,
What?
I remember on our end, guys were transitioning out and getting six-figure jobs, especially mechanics, to go to Saudi Arabia
Ooh,
and do maintenance on their fleet of Abrams because and I guess in their culture they didn't have a whole lot of guys that wanted to be wrench turners or whatever the case may be.
or
But
not that talented.
mechanics are making six-figure jobs. You go from being a corporal, tank mech in the Marine Corps to being six-figure mechanic guy in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Yeah, but you got to live in Saudi Arabia.
Correct.
No offense to all the Saudi Arabian people, but you got to live there.
That's exactly right.
140 degrees out there while he's turning wrenches. He grabs the wrong one that's in the sun and not in the shade. And it burns his hand. Oh man. What other movies? Tank movies. I think about this. You know what? When we were at TBS, we're out doing company against company or whatever. And me and my buddies, we found a Sherman tank in the woods at TBS, just sitting there with trees growing around it and the whole 9 yards. We got up on it and crawled in it, and I thought about that years later. we were doing a camp at Camp Upshur, and I talked to the range control guy, and I told him that story, and he goes, "Oh yeah, we pulled that out." Really? He goes, "Oh yeah, we went in there and cut a bunch of trees down and pulled that thing out, and they're trying to redo it at the museum or something now."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I was on active duty when Saving Private Ryan came out, and, I think I saw it in the theater 3 times, and the first time when the ground begins to shake at the end of the movie, as the German tanks are approaching,
Yeah.
I just looked at my buddy and I said, "Tanks." We didn't know what was gonna happen. It's like, "It's tanks." And that was another movie that I thought was fairly accurate in portraying how hopeless the situation was, as you're a couple of guys with light weapons trying to stop a tank. Now, they did some
Mhm.
creative things. There was a little Hollywood magic in there as well, but it also highlighted how vulnerable those tanks were on those city streets. So you're this Tiger tank, and if you can get a hatch open, you can get the guys inside. If you can, blow off a track and immobilize it, then you can get behind it and take a kill shot with a light bazooka or something like that. But
Mhm.
that movie was, Steven Spielberg waited his whole life to make that movie, and I think he put a lot into making it as accurate as he could.
Well, he
And
did a good job as Band of Brothers as well. That
yes,
that
yeah,
showed the tanker's life, and especially the Brits. I don't know, were they in a Firefly or something? But coming down, and he's like, "Stop! There's a German right there. There's a tank. Well, if I can't see him, I can't shoot him. Shoot right through the building. I can't. Rules state I can't. All right, fine. Go get your butt shot off. Oh my God. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. My buddy that was over there, he recalled seeing 2 German soldiers run behind a haystack, and he put a round into the haystack, and just the next thing you know, the 2 guys come running out with their hands up. That they'd had enough.
Yeah. Tell us some more stories about that, about
You
your
know,
friend.
his name was Harry Hitt, and Mr. Hitt was a really special guy. He went into the war, enlisted, and worked his way up to being a tank commander, a sergeant tank commander. He actually received a battlefield commission signed by General Patton after the Battle of the Bulge. So, so many losses, and they're looking around at who can take over the platoon, and it was him. So he was then second lieutenant Hitt. And in traveling through Germany, he says that probably the biggest mistake of his life, they passed an abandoned flak gun. I think he said it was maybe a 20 millimeter. It was just abandoned on the side of the road. And so they looked at it and kept right on going. And just minutes later, something hit the back of the turret. And he thinks maybe the crew was hiding in the woods. Nobody will ever know. And they shot around, and it hits the turret. The tank lights up. He passes out inside and comes to. The turret's full of smoke. He's bleeding profusely from the head, and makes 2 attempts to get out of the tank. The rest of the crew had already bailed out. They thought he was dead.
Wow.
On a second attempt, a guy just happened to see his head pop up out of the commander's cupola, and the crew rushes over, and they pull him out, and they lay him on the side of the road and cover him in a blanket. And that's pretty much it for him. But he survived. Medics came and got him. He made a full recovery, was shipped back stateside. His war was over. And this guy lived till 94 years old, a successful businessman and family man. And it just an amazing story of, how somebody was in, a really tough situation and was severely wounded, but lived out to a ripe old age.
God, that's amazing. And you guys had that little bond too, because you probably both went through the armor course at Fort Knox.
It's some things are just, they're ubiquitous. It's the same. Yeah, the tank life is the same. The technology changes, but it's probably an infantryman from World War II and an infantryman from Afghanistan could probably sit and have some of those same shared experiences. The other story I'd tell you is my first platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Lee, later went on in his career to become a warrant officer, and then I guess they made him a lieutenant. He was in Fallujah,
Mhm.
and they were parked in a square, and they were just taking out guys in buildings, mostly using the machine guns, and they ran out of coax ammunition. And so I mentioned earlier, I think that thing holds 20,000 rounds, if that tells you
Mhm.
anything.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And so he's got to climb up out of the turret and grab a box of ammo. And we spoke after the war, and he related this story to me firsthand. And he said, he climbed out of the turret, he's reaching over into the bustle rack to grab a can of ammo, and the whole world went into slow motion. At about 75 yards, an Iraqi with an SVD sniper rifle is just lowering the barrel right at his chest. And he said he saw the flash and he felt the impact of the round. He grabbed the ammo and he slumped back down into the turret. It had gone through his bicep, through and through, in and out. Didn't hit the bone.
Wow.
Just he said, a few inches one way or the other, he's dead. He said the guy should never have missed. So they close the hatch back up. He takes a roll of duct tape. He duct tapes his arm where the bullet went through, and they continue to fight. I think they sat in that square fighting for like 24 or some straight hours. When they finally pulled him off the line, he ended up being put up for the Silver Star for being a pivotal part of supporting that infantry company and fighting through his injury.
Wow. That's only one box. So, I mean, how many rounds in one box? 200
Only 100
rounds?
rounds. So I don't know if he made repeated trips up or exactly how they did it. But yeah, they fought. Yeah, Fallujah obviously quite a mess, but the tanks in that type of an environment where they had support could pull into a square or an intersection and just blast window after window after window, clearing blocks. And that's what they were doing.
Nice asset to have.
Very nice.
Well, Godspeed to our tanks. Maybe the next commandant will say, nah, you know what? Maybe we do need tanks, or we need something like a Bradley or something. But
yeah, we pride ourselves, as you know, as being kind of our own full complement. We have our own air, we have our own armor, we have our own infantry, we have our own artillery, because that's the purpose of the Marine Corps, is to take beaches and to take airfields and so forth. And so I think the feeling within the tank community is by removing the armor asset from the Marine Corps, it makes us dependent on the Army in a way that we weren't previously dependent on the Army.
Sure.
And I think that's where the real chagrin comes from. Now, whether the commandant ends up being right and the age of the tank is passing and the age of the missile is here, only time can tell. But I think from an emotional side of it, most of us felt like, we're crippling the Marine Corps by abdicating this role to the Army.
Yeah. Oh, I can see that totally. Hey, something came to mind. Did you guys carry any shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles with you? Did you have those up there?
We did
in
not.
case you were out there and they, had to face off a hind or anything?
So interestingly, there's actually main gun ammunition, 120 millimeter cannon ammunition that's designed as anti-air. So proximity fused impact rounds is what they were called. And when we went through the gunnery simulators, you shot at helicopters with the main gun as part of is what you were trained on. So you hit it with a laser, and the gun knew that you had an impact round loaded, and you'd fire that just like you were shooting at a tank.
No way.
Yeah. Now, that was something, I don't know if that's ever been done, but that would be something I'd love to paint a hind silhouette on the side of a turret. That would be pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, man. How do you shoot a hind? Just don't lead it as much.
Something like that, for sure.
Gotta give it a little bit of lead. Hey, so we got some pictures. Here's you and your bride.
Yeah, this is at Camp Lejeune. We were they actually stood down Charlie Company, decommissioned the unit, and then I think they stood it back up for about another year and decommissioned it again. But this is the first time that we got word that second tanks was slowly being phased out. And so Charlie Company, you can see the marker there. If you real quickly, you probably know your AFVID. That V-shaped mark indicates that tank is from Charlie Company. And so my bride and I went up there for that ceremony, saw a bunch of guys that I served with, and that was a really, really special trip.
That's cool as hell. I see the 240 back behind there.
Yep.
And then what's right over her head? Is that a 50?
That's the 50 cal. Yeah. And it's a different aiming system than the one that I used. I think it's a little more remote, a little bit safer. And not that there's me with the old system out in the desert. You got that's 29 palms, so one of those 120-degree days, most likely.
Do you have IR sighting sights and all that stuff in there?
So the tank is equipped with thermal sights, and they're actually the primary sighting system for the tank is the thermal system. So we didn't train with it a lot because the daylight sights were fine. We mostly shot in the day, but at night you did switch to thermals, and it works just as good as a daylight sight, and really, actually, it's phenomenal. I'm sure thermal technology is way more advanced. That's probably what's in the A2 now, is a much more advanced thermal targeting system. But we liked thermal. Probably a couple of stories with things I've seen on thermal that I probably shouldn't have seen. But
yeah, what? Tell us. Tell us. That's kind of fun.
well, I'm these guys. You got guys from all parts of the country in all backgrounds, just like anywhere else. And so I won't say where or when to keep it anonymous, but somebody really liked venison. And so we were out on the range one night, and the tank calls at the tower and says, "I've got a mover from left to right. Need to test my coax." And the tower says, tower doesn't have thermal. They can't see what the tank's seeing. So the tower says, "Permission granted." So you see all of a sudden this guy lets loose, and it's a zigzag pattern tracers running back and forth across the range. And he says, "Target, ceasefire." And nobody really knew what that was all about until later that night. They went down range and got the deer. And they brought
How many holes did that have in it? Yeah.
They brought it back, and we cut it up and ate it.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Cook it on the tail.
Yeah,
tail of the tank.
A couple of times, deer were the subject of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In fact, when I was at Fort Knox, it was interesting. We our first night shoot ever in the tank, and so we're sitting in there waiting for the thermals to cool down, and I'm staring in the scope, and downrange there's dozens of deer. They're everywhere, and I thought, I can't wait till the first main gun round goes off. I'm going to just watch these deer just scatter.
Right.
So I'm waiting, and we weren't first to shoot, and I'm watching, and then tank one, boom, fires off the main gun. This deer didn't even flinch.
Really?
Their main tank gun rounds flying right over their head all night long. They just sat there.
Really?
They were just used to it. Or deaf. I don't know. One or the other.
Deaf, probably. Here's a good shot of the inside in the shooter's hatch, right?
Yep, that's the loader's seat, the loader's position there. And so he's got those black handles are what he's holding onto to pivot the control of the turret and the gun. I could take 10 minutes saying what all that is.
No. So we're kind of going through it. He's got the sighting systems. Looks like two or three different.
So you've got three sights, so a little redundancy there. You've got over his right ear, our left, you can see the thermal sight there. There's that green glow is coming in. You've got the main sight, which is directly in front of him. It's kind of got a silver ring about it. And actually, there should be a brow piece there, like a pad for him to rest his head on. And I don't know why that's not there, but that it would
export version.
Yeah, maybe so. And then all the way to the left side of the frame, there's a tube with like a black cone sticking out.
Yeah.
And we call that the gas sight, gunner's auxiliary sight. And that is just a pure optical. It's got hash marks in it. There's nothing digital about it. So if you lost power and you lost your sights, you could still look through that. That's old school. That's like what you would use in World War II. The gunner could look through there and kind of line up the crosshairs, if you will, to fire the main gun. And in that situation, because the gun fires electrically, if you lost electrical power, in order to fire the gun, that red T handle that you see just below the gas sight, we call it the hell box, the firebox, or the master blaster. And you crank that thing like a demo charge, and we create an electric circuit that would fire the main gun round. So part of our training, actually, annually, was you had to fire at least one round using that red handle to prove that you knew what you were doing and that those systems all function correctly on the tank. So you give that thing a twist and off she'd go. So that's all the different sight arrays and controls. You can't really see it. There's a white box kind of over his left shoulder, our right. That's where the commander's joystick, if you will, the TC override, tank commander override. So as the commander, you can grab that with your right hand and you can take control of the turret away from the gunner. And the reason that you would do that is because if your head's up high and you see something that he can't see down in that hole, you could grab the turret and immediately swing it left or right and line him up on a target. And so that's a really important redundancy that's in there. So the tank commander can control the turret, can laze and fire. He's got a duplicate sight that he's looking through that's out of frame as well. So he sees what the gunner sees.
Right.
And in a worst case scenario, if you lost your gunner, you could still fight the tank from the commander's position.
Yeah, I see. How fast would the turret turn?
Surprisingly fast. I don't know. I'm sure somebody knows the miles per hour, but it moves really, really quick. It's one of those things where you could swing that thing around, and if you're not somebody's on the ground not paying attention, it put a hurt on you if the barrel hits you on the side of the head.
Oh crap. What about you've got a coax right there
Yep,
on the
yep.
left side of the frame of the picture.
Just above his right hand, there is a silver loop, and that's the charging lanyard for the coax machine gun, and the butt end of it is there. It is slaved ballistically to the main gun. So, in theory, when it's properly zeroed, wherever the main gun's shooting, it's shooting as well. And the gunner can select coax. There's an orange light in front of his face there, and I think there's a selector switch in there. So he can select coax and look through the sight, and when he squeezes the trigger, it's going to fire that 30 cal machine gun. And that is because it's ballistically, the computer knows it's a 308 caliber bullet. It knows how much it weighs. It knows the exit velocity. It's an extremely accurate machine gun. And I would say in an urban environment, you're using that as much as you're using the main gun.
That's amazing. That's the one with 20,000 rounds.
Correct. I'll tell you another quick story. I had my own little Top Gun moment one time. We were out at 29 Palms. This is probably one of my favorite stories. And again, I served in peacetime. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity, but I don't feel like I hold a candle to the guys that did this stuff on the two-way range. But they brought this. He was from one of the stands, Uzbekistan, or one of the stands. They brought this general out there to watch us do a fire support package. I was a FIST team leader, and we were calling, I think it was F-18s. And so they bring this guy out there to observe it. And something of training with the foreign guys or bringing them out there, it never sat right with me. I just didn't like it. I just thought, well, why are we letting these guys that
giving
were
away our secrets?
Yeah, they're Eastern Bloc guys. The wall had only been down at that point for less than 10 years. For all we knew, we'd be fighting them in a few years, right? So he's out there with his little entourage and public affairs crew in their Jeep Cherokee. And the timing just lined up so that as we were finishing and retrograding back to Camp Wilson, they were leaving the training area as well. So he's on the road in front of me in a Jeep Cherokee with his little entourage, and I'm behind him in the Abrams. Yeah. And so I give the driver instructions, get off the road and pull up alongside of him. So he juices it, and we catch up to him, and we can go a lot faster than he can because he's bumping around in a car basically, and we're in tank. Yeah. And we swung that gun barrel over. I grabbed the override and I swung that gun barrel over, and I pointed it right at that Russian general or whatever. And I just held it there. And I just held it on him, like the gun stabilized. So as we're hitting the bumps, it's just staying right on him as we're floating along. I don't know. I just wanted to send my message like, you're in our crosshairs. You may be watching.
Did you ever hear anything about that?
No, never heard anything about it. Didn't ever got in any kind of trouble or anything for it. So I was a salty first lieutenant by that point in my career, and I felt like I could kind of sway around some. So yeah. We ended up passing them and just blowing dust on them the whole way back. So it was good.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, I tell you what, Jeff, I've got you on here for an hour and 8 minutes. I can't believe it's gone by that fast. If you find those other guys that that had the tank in Iraq, I would love to talk to them and bring them on the show as well. You are a great speaker. My God. Man, it's been years since you've been in it, and it's just like yesterday for you.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I've had a lot of opportunities to do public speaking on other subjects, not so much this, but you know how it is. It's in your blood, and you may leave it, but it never leaves you. And so a lot of those experiences feel like they were just yesterday.
Yeah, I miss the circus, or I don't miss the circus, but I miss the clowns.
That's absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anyway, listen, I will see you Monday, and hopefully let's count on Monday, put it on your calendar, and we'll go have some fun. I can't thank you enough, brother. I got so I give all the guests a little token. So when you come out here,
nice,
save me some money on FedEx.
Nice. Looking forward to it.
All right, brother. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. And folks, if you're out there, if you got questions about armor, definitely put them out there so that we can ask Jeff, and we can try to ask those questions and get them answered. Thanks so much. If you like it, share it, subscribe. Tall Tales with Taco Bell. Until next time, I'll see you. Thanks, Jeff. Guys, adios, hasta luego, sa wiedersehen, tschüss, sheshe, ni, au revoir, domo arigato gozaimasu, tando shinde kudasai, ciao, arrivederci, tashikur, assalamu alaikum, mahala, do widzenia, das vidanya. You guys have a good one. We'll catch you next week. Until then, I'm going to leave you with this one. Take care.